Scott, you wrote an article that was on LinkedIn, and just prior to the comments being turned off, I posted a couple of things about who has responsibility for things such as writing procedures, managing risk and so forth. And you and I had a fairly sort of robust disagreement about that, which led to this conversation here. What I'd like to get your understanding about is, first of all, what motivated you to write the article about the failures at the isolation hotel?
Well, so I suppose the first part with that, when I say you say failures, it's about corrective improvements. I think with the actual program and what's in place, one of the things that I don't believe our industry does very well nationally, not just on individual states, is working together from that consultative point of view, looking what we can from learnings of current and previous projects to make sure that we round off what we're doing and making a better overall security solution. So part of it wasn't in response to actual specific failings, although we're obviously aware of many. It was more about from that improvement point of view. And I think that what really motivated it was there was no discussions about some of the things that we could be doing better to get a better response, to get a better unified, a response to what we're doing and consistent approach. So that was my initial motivation behind that, not so much about for the failures, but just about focusing on what can be done better, because I think there's some things that we could have done combined, even taking into account the time pressures. And I think
you're talking about the security provider and the sort of key stakeholders, the project owners and so the client effectively.
Well, no, even broader than that, and so I'm glad you actually had mentioned that as well, because that's been some of the discussions that I've definitely been involved in with a variety of people, not just even about the actual client, because I mean there's multiple people involved. So not just the client. You had obviously in both states multiple departments, divisions, as well as specialty services. But I suppose the more effective approach and where I was trying to head for with that article is, I think, especially with this sort of project, if there was some type of initial consultative approach that would have involved, for example, broader stakeholders, so members of hotel management, like you're from a cross section for sites, members from obviously the hygiene, sanitary, healthcare, like your parts, as well as security providers, and the different representations for the different stakeholders, which I know are different in the different states. I think some time and energy focused on that may have helped get a better consistent starting point across, like for with the sites. So when I speak to a variety of different people involved in different elements with the project, and even from different positions, so I'm saying hotel compared to security as well, I believe that there could have been some real benefit to that with rounding off what was happening from the planning point of view.
So one of the challenges that they had was that this was all done with the greatest of haste, and the reason simply was there was a decision to create an isolation hotel to quarantine people who were coming into the country, and those planes and those people were coming. So they obviously didn't have a lot of time to muck around. I mean, in your article, you said that security firms involved were provided often less than 36 hours notice to have a large number of guards there. You said that the briefing occurred on Tuesday, 31st of March, and then the sites were allocated on April Fool's Day, funnily enough, the next day. So, so that's not a lot of lead time, is it?
No. So with some of those, and even post the actual commencement with those, and without mentioning specific sites and states, there's been notices as short as 5 and 6 hours sometimes with the rollouts with those. And, in response to some of the points that you mentioned with the comments and that as well, there were some very valid ones that you said about making sure from a capability point of view, from a resource numbers, and why would you be putting your hand up to say, hey, I can do this, if you didn't have the actual resource numbers. So, and I agree wholeheartedly for with that, that can happen in our industry. People say, there's some work. How many people do you need? Okay, I'll get it. And I suppose, what is it? The Richard Branson model, say yes, and then work it out. Whilst there's definitely obviously some concerns that, for that happening, part of this is about and where the focus, the crux of my article was, I suppose, was to try and generate some discussion on focus on what are we going to do differently about that, not just from the resource point of view and verification or validation of the resource numbers. What are we going to do more collaboratively to help improve and then roll that process out? Because the same you could equally say to sometimes from the festival event and other parts as well with mass gatherings. And that's where I think as an industry, we haven't told our story like you're very well. And I think that part of the reason will be because we haven't done that. we potentially sometimes get left out of some of these initial planning sessions, where I think that some of the people and some of the people within their industry could have been of real benefit. People with broader skill sets like them myself, and even
let's explore that a minute, because coming back to the conversation that you and I were having earlier, I've always felt that one word that most of the security industry don't seem to know is the word no. So, a bloke who is a security guard on Friday, working for an employer, becomes a security company owner and director on Monday. He has no commercial acumen. The only thing he knows is what he experienced. So if his former employer was shonky, or they underpaid him, or they were badly organised, then he too, or she too, I should say, will also be, similarly shonky, and so on it goes. But the problem that I see all the time is that person who's owned a company for less than 24 hours, the first thing they do is they build a website that lists all of their clients. So, they went to McDonald's for lunch, so they'll put McDonald's down as a client, and they have a bank account, put a bank logo there as a client. And it's all BS. And of course, they'll also then run out and get a van, and the front of that van will say, car number 37 on the front of it. And on the back of it, it'll say guards, patrols, cash in transit, bodyguards, alarms, cameras, monitoring, security grills, cleaning, gardening. Where does it end? And in many cases, that's a sole trader that doesn't even, own that vehicle themselves. And yet there's just this kind of perpetual thing in what I feel is an industry that has made lying so normal that people can't even sort of differentiate fact from fiction. And so sort of coming back to these hotels, I mean, I could sense your concern that perhaps what they were asking was beyond the realms of possibility, or should have been put in the too hard basket. But we weren't talking about security companies that were bound by an existing contract and really had their hands tied to this thing, and then suddenly it expanded. Companies did, as you said, put their hands up for this. So the comment that I made was that I'm not hugely sympathetic for someone who knows what the scope is, or at least has a fairly reasonable idea of what it is, and then voluntarily puts a hand up for it, as opposed to companies that perhaps said, no, this is too hard, or no, this is not our core business, or no, we think this is going to end in tears, and they didn't. How do you think sort of those companies contrasted with each other?
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of it with that is, firstly, from the capability point of view, and what you're saying about when we talk about managing security perception, it's not just about what you do for a premises to appear more safe and secure. It's what people, in this, from an organizational point of view, there is definitely firms that do that. They have a cousin that's a graphic designer, and so if they've got a great website and a great brochure and these sort of things, and sadly, before we get into this other part, sadly, that's something from an end user client, regardless of any type of project, because we, once again, haven't communicated well as an industry, and even from the SLED point of view. I know during my time on the SLED advisory board, one of the things I mentioned was we're doing all these increased communication and elements with the actual industry members, but what are we doing to really give content and solid content to end users to say, these are the sort of things you should be looking and checking to know if you're working with a quality provider. So from that point of view, I could not agree more that there's definitely work that can be done. And once again, I believe that's from a consultative type approach to communicate better about that, so people know some of those things to look for. Secondly, when it comes to I suppose the acceptance of work, and from that capability point of view, part of that, due to the timeframes post the National Cabinet meeting and briefings, and this is from myself even speaking to a variety of people in and around the project as well, is that from the initial scope point of view, in briefing, at your point of view, and I preface this by saying all the stakeholders involved, the different industry regulators, the different people involved from the client point of view, and in hotel and others. There are a lot of those parts because this was a unique project that they were finding out different elements as they progress. So part of it, there was no discussions that you would see about, for example, hang on a sec, the people pushing around the trolleys with the testing kits and using those, what guidelines are we going to give them for how they're going to chop and change what they're doing with PPE and others, let alone dealing with the food, hotel, your kitchen areas and a range of other elements. So there's so many moving.
The line that got Tony Abbott in strife was when he just acknowledged that shit happens, and I mean it really does, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, and there's going to be a range of things that are going to happen, during these type of projects with so many people involved in so many moving parts. You're going to get crossover involvement when it comes to, I suppose, allocation of responsibility, and like an accountability piece from the communication structure. I mean, some of the things we're talking about is from, the planning and operational point of view, but then activity reporting, like an analysis with that incident communication. So those sort of things, and that was some of the other parts that I didn't get to with the article, and part of it is, I suppose, not wanting to, as I said, bore the non-security people to tears. But from that consistency and approach, like as well, in my idea, and as I said, these are my own thoughts and opinions, but I'm always happy to be, questioned on them. If we had some more of that, I suppose, rolling consultative approach, then there may have been things that, as things happened in different states, in different sites, information that fed back on this has happened, here's what we're doing in response, and others, there could have been some unified, like a consistent approach across the entire project to say, we're doing this now together. And that way all boats rise together, because otherwise, if using the combination of people, and it's different with different ones, between levels of experience of hotel management, levels of experience with the security management,
in this case, who would you say was the client? Because it seems to me that the hotels really just became almost a venue, and they obviously had some operations going on in the background. But I mean, the client in this case, both in Victoria and New South Wales, would have been the state government, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and so part of that there, and when I'm saying for the multiple stakeholders involved, there was definitely some communication dynamics between the individual sites, the hotels, and the client, and I'm going to say the managing body. So in other words, New South Wales, if you've got Department of Premier and Cabinet being with the customer, you've got Property New South Wales and others involved with the organisation and logistics, you've got New South Wales Police, ADF, a range of people in, then hotel management. The mapping process and the overlay with that is, in essence, you've got to have things which are the right plan to mitigate the risks, but those risks have got to be what risks are provided by the client, awareness of the program, healthcare, sanitation, hygiene, risks, standard security risks, and a range of other parts. And so that combination mapping, and I completely understand the time frame involved. I said in my article, and I completely stand by that as well. Every single party and stakeholder involved with this was under time pressures and in constraints to get this done.
I mean, as they'd say in show business, the show must go on. And I mean, obviously,
yes,
there were a lot of moving pieces here, and the sands were constantly shifting under everybody. And I would imagine that everybody on every side was, understanding of that. So there would have been, the early rush to stand up, and then and then a more sort of prolonged maturation that happened over that. But I mean, coming back to what you were saying earlier about, clients needing to understand the issues and I suppose skill up in understanding risk and understanding how to manage it. I think while I'd certainly say that's the case probably for the majority of your mums and dads and your domestic sort of market, and probably for far too much of the commercial market, who I think, continue to sort of fail to understand security or risk. These are specialised things, which is, of course, why they perhaps turn to security risk professionals. The same way you completely entrust your health management to your doctor, you just tend to, assign trust on that base. So, but I think that said, people like, for example, Department of Premiers and Cabinet, police, ADF, state government, they would tend to be a much more sophisticated buyer, I would imagine, than, say, your standard corporate or stadium operator or, venue operator who perhaps really just...
Agreed. But if you look at the example, I would say if you look at the example you gave then, so and definitely agree, they're definitely a more sophisticated buyer. But if you look at some of those elements, so do that to a direct comparison, for example, like a stadium. If you're dealing with a stadium operational management, game day management, and also people like, the food vendors, ticketing staff, and a range of others, a similar thing happens with a lot of those mass gathering like events, is that you're getting direction, information, and initial briefing content from members of management. But unless you drill down and you're getting feedback from the ticketing staff, the food vendors, and a range of others to put as part of your planning matrix, another part, then you miss some of the initial measures. So it's actually a great example. So with this, what you said is definitely right. They're definitely more educated, experienced buyers, but you've also got the healthcare elements, hotel-related elements. So some of these things need to be the safe, secure environment, still aligned with their operational efficiency and guidelines and other things that need to occur. And it's that combination planning element where those things tie together. And I don't believe there's any like one answer for it, but that was the crux of this, to get some discussion and focus around that.
One of the differences between New South Wales and Victoria, I mean, Victoria's just proposed they were actually already in the midst of a review into the private security industry. There's some argument about the scope of that and whether that should involve the Licensing and Regulation Division, or the LRD, which is the Victorian equivalent to SLED here in New South Wales, where you and I are based. And of course, when there was the drama arising from the Victorian isolation hotels, where it was said that guards were having sex with guests, and then guards managed to get infected and then return to their small enclaves where that infection was passed to others. There was another review arising out of that. So there's going to be lots of reviews there. But I think whereas I think New South Wales, which has certainly had its fair share of security industry drama, certainly as long as I've been in the industry, which is 20 plus years, has matured. We had an ICAC inquiry that led to the abolition of the failed security industry registry, and has created SLED, which I think now is probably quite ahead of the other states in respect to regulation and so forth. So New South Wales government is certainly not without its problem. I think local governments, by and large, are a disaster for security procurement, because they really try to go after the lowest quote in many regards, and I think that leads to a cutting of standards. But at the level that this was operating in a multi-agency thing, I think they were quite advanced compared to Victoria. So I suppose one of the questions would be surrounding subcontracting, because that historically has been a problem. And the former police minister, when they were looking at changing the Security Industry Act in New South Wales, said that subcontracting is a major problem for the security industry, and it causes corner cutting. It causes, in many cases, it causes exploitation of workers, if not outright fraud. And of course, often the end user is blissfully unaware of this until something blows up, and then it ends up in court. What's your understanding of the challenges that subcontracting created that would have led to them forming that view?
Sure. Well, I suppose a couple of different points with this. Firstly, I am 100% supportive of, as part of our legislation as well, Section 38, rolling out and being a base format with the national legislation. So sorry, just for the
people who don't know what you're talking about, Section 38 says?
So Section 38 of the Act for the unlawful subcontracting. So in other words, in New South Wales, as part of with our engagement framework, the relevant legislation is being transparent with regards to if there's any use of contractors with that work. Right. So so part of that should
is you need authorization from the end user. They have to say yes, you can use subcontractors, and then you also have to transparently disclose to them who those subcontractors were and what their particulars are.
Yeah, and I'm very supportive, and always have been, about rolling that as part of with the national framework from that integrity point of view. Part of it, and with this, and I know obviously with and I'll get back to the contracting part, but I'm curious, and as you mentioned as well, with your time in the industry, over 20 years as well, knowing I suppose some of the crux points with my article and some follow-up discussions have been about getting that consistent perspective and consistent starting point from the training and induction point of view. I'm curious as to your thoughts as well as to how you think we may have been best served, or if, from your awareness and things that you're experiencing and hearing about the project, what your thoughts and opinions are on how you think that may have been improved to help get that starting point. Because we may have different ideas and options, and that's why I was really happy to do this discussion, because it's about checking different perspectives and getting a thought for different people's ideas. Well,
most people know me and my company Calamity in respect to the work we mainly do in electronics and technology. So that's security systems installation, monitoring, CCTV surveillance, and so forth. But over the course of my career, I've worn many hats, and been everything from a firewall hacker to a firearms instructor, and so forth. And very early on in my company's history, I was involved quite heavily. At the start of my career, I should say, I was involved in guarding, and given my size, I sort of fell into security. It's just the way it was, and I think at this stage I can probably let my mother know that once upon a time I worked at rough pubs and things like that. And that was my foray into this industry, as it was for many. When I started Calamity, in around 2008, well, in 2008, we were lucky enough to be invited to tender for the Catholic World Youth Day. And that was a very, very eye-opening exercise for me, because at the time it was the biggest single event that had ever been held in this country, and it was hundreds of guards and hundreds of thousands of man hours at basically at one or two sites, and it was even bigger than the Sydney Olympics from a security point of view, because the Sydney Olympics was a number of venues over a number of weeks, whereas this had this massive concentration. And when I went to the initial meeting there, I walked into the room and they said to me, okay, well, we need this many guards and we need this many hours and we need them to be deployed as follows. Have you got those resources? And I said, no, I don't have that many guards. And, they got quite frustrated and started folding up their books and getting ready to basically walk out of the meeting. And I said, well, hang on a minute. Nobody has that many guards. And they said, yes, they do. We've had a number of companies that have told us they can do it. And I said, well, now hang on a minute. There's only about 2 companies in the whole country that have that many people on their payroll. Yeah. In order for them to do this job for you for, a week or two, they basically have to tell airports, railways, bus lines, you name it, we're not coming to work next week, which just wasn't going to happen. So now they sort of sat down and they cautiously reopened their notebooks and they said, okay, well, Daniel, what would you do differently? And I said, well, the first thing I'm doing differently is actually telling you the way it works. So, what these other guys will do is they'll say, yes, we can do it. And then they'll worry about later how. And, they'll ring their cousin and say, how many guards have you got? And he'll ring his cousin and he'll ring his cousin and so on it goes, which of course means that there's 12 degrees of separation between the person who's actually doing the work and probably not getting much money and you, which is fine when everyone's just getting the money, but it all goes to hell when, when these things go wrong. So of course they said to me, well, what would you do differently? I said, it's very simple. I'll ring every security company in rural New South Wales, and I'll get them to send all their guards, and we'll convene a tent city at the racecourse, and they're going to live there, they're going to work there, but they're going to have ready-made teams, and they're going to report up the chain to me, and I'm going to report up the chain to you, and you're going to have a single point of contact, and they're not going to wonder who they're working for on any given day. And they loved it, and it worked. We managed to pull off an unbelievable event, and it was frustrating that a few weeks later, every security company in the country claimed that they'd done the security for World Youth Day because they had one guard outside a church somewhere out of Western Sydney, whereas we actually pulled it off. But, I've been following that ever since. And in this, the same as I referred to the van where there's the sign writing on the side where, the person who owns a van will also say, he has a monitoring centre. So, whereas I own a monitoring centre, I've seen photographs of my centre, which is amazing, appear on other people's website. And I don't know who those people are. And, I send them a message and I say, hey, your monitoring centre looks awesome. Could I arrange a tour? And they write back and say, oh, no, you can't come for security reasons, which, I find funny, except for the fact that it's fundamentally dishonest. So drawing back to, this current discussion, and, I think Section 38 in New South Wales makes a substantial difference, because I think it would be naive to assume that everybody or even the majority of people comply with it. I suspect some people watching this discussion will be even hearing about it for the first time, despite having established.
I can tell you I've had discussions like with clients like during my time in the industry, and since obviously when the legislation came out, whereas part of the discussions have actually provided information, including here is, in this situation, the subcontracting firm that we use has our liability insurance, indemnity insurance, workers' compensation, and for the whole details. And they go, oh, do we need to do anything with this? And that's part of it. If you talk about something that could be a fundamental change with what we're doing as an industry, and for following up and even enforcing it, and some of these elements, is we communicate from the industry regulator point of view to people within the industry. If we honestly think that then industry practitioners are going to generically and consistently throughout the industry say to the end user clients, regardless of how sophisticated a buyer they are, here is the way that we need to act. Here is some of the, what you should be seeing, and feeling. Here's some of the things that you should be checking. It's not going to happen, especially the people that you said that are adjusting those Wix websites that they've built over a weekend, and these sort of things. And that's part of that. All ties into this as an industry. We have not communicated our story well.
On a spectrum between, say, education and upskilling versus, enforcement and shutting down rogue operators. Where along that line do you see it works when companies are being contracted to do something that they have no capability of doing, so they farm it out to someone else rather than simply saying no?
Yeah, well, I mean, so where do I think the best approach is, or where we are, currently as an industry, or what do you specifically want me to answer with regards to that?
Well, let's start with a simple one. When companies say we can do this, and they have no capability of doing it whatsoever, but the client doesn't know that because in good faith they just listen to them saying yes, we can do it, and they then farm it out, in part or in its entirety to others. And perhaps conceal that from the end user who's none the wiser. So, the guards wear someone else's shirt or purport to be working from someone else. And there's just that lack of transparency or integrity there. What do you think should happen?
Yeah, I mean, the Act, obviously, like originally says, 200 penalty points, from memory for an organisation, 100, with an individual for those parts. And then obviously any follow-up, respective action that's taken by the industry regulators. But the other part from where we're sitting currently, so that enforcement compared to the communication piece, I would say that over the last 18 to 24 months, and in New South Wales, there is some element of the end user clients getting a bit more educated about that. In various tenders coming out now, they're actually referring to elements. With that, they actually even pay mention to some elements of the legislation with regards to contracting. They also specify a bit clearer about some parts that even when they do approve some level of contracting, you're not contracting out all rights and obligations and a range of other parts. So I think there's been some success with that, but I truly do think the big missing gap with this, for Section 38 being successful in New South Wales, let alone rolling out to other states, is that communication piece to end users. How that's done and the right message behind that, because I know that industry regulators are tight on resources as well.
By communication with respect to Section 38, you're basically saying communicating that you're using subcontractors and who those subcontractors are. Is that what you mean by that?
Well, I mean, so that's what should happen under Section 38. But I'm saying, aside from with that, if for it to be successful, this is one of many components. For removing that, the success and growing success of some of those organisations, as you said, with just a good website and a couple of good images. So what I'm saying, elements such as, and that's a key part of it, obviously with Section 38 and the related elements, should be part of a top 10 points put out by the industry regulators in the various states. Like you're saying, these are things you should be checking and be aware of when you're engaging with a security provider.
Right. So I mean, the New South Wales example, for instance, I mean, Department of Premiers and Cabinet, who, I believe for the most part were sort of structuring the contract and so forth, they were aware of the risks of subcontracting. And it's my understanding that they'd explicitly prohibited it. They'd said no subcontracting, which of course by definition means therefore no one can have authorised subcontracting because the clients said no. That's your understanding, well, isn't it? Okay. So So Premier Cabinet being with the actual customer involved, but with the management of that would be managed looking through separate division with New South Wales government and I think property the division as well. But yes, you're right. I mean, it was my understanding that your company who were involved had used subcontractors. So how do you sort of reconcile that difference there? What happened? What went wrong?
What did you mean, when you're saying for my company? Sorry. Well,
Southern Cross Group, I understood, were one of the companies providing guards to that contract, and it's my understanding that there were allegations that they were doing unauthorised subcontracting there. So I'm just interested in how you reconcile that, or what actually went wrong there.
I suppose a couple of points with it. Firstly, as mentioned to you with this discussion and interview, I'm here representing myself and my own thoughts, not any organisation or association.
I understand it. I mean, you're the CEO of the company, which is why I asked. Obviously, you're across what happened, and I'm just interested in what the failure was and what are the sort of learning outcomes from that.
Sure. Two things. Firstly, not the CEO. The second point with that, as said from... Thanks, no worries. Second part with this... As obviously, in knowing where this discussion would head from an interview, your point of view, because I know I'm going to say semi-sensationalistic style and approach that you take with this sort of stuff, Daniel. my initial response would be, rather than like heading down this path and specifically saying, was there allegations in other parts, like from Southern Cross point of view, if you're aware of elements like that I'm not with regards to specific discussions on subcontracting, more than happy to review any material content that you've been provided for with that. The second point, with regards to use of contracting and across for engagement completely throughout New South Wales with the hotel isolation project, I also think there's been quite a few mixed messages as to how things have been communicated industry-wide. And I'll give you a couple of specific examples for with that. Section 38 like very clearly says what's involved from a contracting point of view, from a subcontracting point of view. So the engagement of another firm, contracting out rights and obligations, and the relevant framework around that. There's a completely different opportunity for all providers, and which is generically taken up by a large portion of people in and around both states when it comes to with their workforce. There's a large number, substantial number of resources in both states due to COVID, where you've got organisations that sadly just haven't got work for their people. Anyone specifically in and around the event space, licensed premises, large number of construction, static, all those sort of areas.
There's a lot of guards out there who are looking for work.
100%. So the second stage for with that.
On that basis, then, it seems to me that there'd almost be less need for subcontracting, because traditionally, there were probably two, I suppose, valid reasons that people would subcontract as opposed to shonky reasons. Sure. One would be because there's just some sudden spike or surge or a one-off, or because there's some sort of geographic constraint. But I mean, on this occasion, it would seem there's a whole lot of manpower that may even been available. So, a head contractor, maybe they need to do some quick recruitment or something, but should be able to do it. So I'm sort of coming back to the question of why then is then that need to push things down the line, particularly when the contract explicitly said don't do it. It's very, this was the comment I made on LinkedIn the other day. It's very hard to be sympathetic for a company that gets told don't do this, but then goes and does it anyway. And then,
of course, 100%. So to understand exactly like my point with that is, from a contracting point of view, obviously engaging a separate entity and engaging employing, so contracting out with that workforce for those people. That's a very different thing than with these organisations that have a substantial amount of people that are unemployed due to obviously all the circumstances that we just mentioned before. Saying to those people,
when the contract specifically,
Daniel, you got to let me finish, Daniel, with the point. Like you're for this as well. But for those people, so for example, you and I both very much understand, obviously, like your standard business contractual law. We also understand the security legislation and taxation legislation. Mm-hmm. Speaking to an organisation and saying, you have got 50 people that are unemployed with those now. You're not going to have any work for those people for 6 to 12 months. Refer those people across to our organisation. And when I'm saying our organisation, I'm saying generically for the large number of people in and around this industry and in both states. Refer those people into our organisation. We will be engaging and employing for those people. They'll be signing our application forms, our letters of offer. They'll be on our. Hang on a sec. They'll be on our payroll. They'll be on our like you're reporting to our supervisors. So we're engaging them as part of. With that, you're going to receive a referral fee of $1.50 an hour or something completely separate. You're not involved in the administrative elements.
How much subcontracting though? I mean, that almost sounds like, recruitment exercise more than anything else.
And Daniel, so the exact same point that I just said to you now, and the exact response saying about the difference between contracting and what I just mentioned to you is specifically the points that have been mentioned within both states with regards to the engagement of people and the misconception and understanding as to what that translates to.
But what's the misconception? I mean, for me, the name that appears on someone's payslip, assuming they actually get a payslip, that really is their employer, isn't it?
You are 100% correct. So as part of with that, then liaising with other firms who are basically saying, I've got no work for these guys. And rather than completely like having nothing to do with me, if I can introduce them to you, so you can give them some work for the next 3 or 4 months and you're engaging and managing those. And as part of with that, so I'm still getting whatever it was, like as a different figure, whether it's $1, $1.50, $2, because different people, different frames, different commercial relationship. You and I are completely 100% aligned.
Just to understand,
that is not contracting.
Them to the client, or a company that's idle is basically saying, Scott, here's 10 staff that have nothing better to do. Would you like to, I suppose, borrow them, or would you like to put them on your books for a few weeks? Is that what you're talking about?
Yes. Yeah. So from a contracting point of view, is saying a primary contractor saying, we've got 100 people. We need to. We've got 100 people. So, or a client saying to me, we need to get 100 people. Contracting is me saying, I've only got 10 people. I'm going to engage company XYZ to provide me the rest of these people. That company is going to invoice me, have their own licenses, and like have that part. That's contracting. We all agree with that.
But the way you described it isn't problematic. I mean, if I said to you, Scott, I need you to do this, and you said, well, I can't do that, but if you wanted, this is what I could do. I could bring in this company and this company and this company. As an end user or as a client, I could then say, yep, that makes sense. Thanks for doing it. Go ahead. Or I could say, no, I want to deal with one party, so that's not going to work.
Sure.
I think what we had here, though, is a breakdown where there was a very clear expectation from the client that there wasn't going to be subcontracting. And I know there were some, very large firms, for whatever reason, said, we're not going near this project. I think some of them had probably been in the media a bit too much over the last 12 months and didn't really need another blow up. But, there was absolute certainty that, there wasn't to be subcontracting. So I think there's a breakdown in that argument when you because we're not sort of talking about referrals. I mean, look, I've had staff who, we've had to...
No, I need to interject for a second.
You're not. I've rung other mates and I've said, listen, I've got this guy, he's really good. Do you want to give them a job, to try and sort of, move them along? But I think that's very different from, what to me is pretty black and white about subcontracting. And I mean, you could always ask, and then the customer can always say yes or no. And that's really what Section 38 demands of you. But I think that's different from, from doing it. I mean, the allegations were, and look, in Victoria, I don't think it's even illegal. It's probably just shonky. But I mean, in New South Wales, it does breach the Security Industry Act. And the allegations were that the head contract specifically said, no subcontracting, but then companies...
I know, you've said that and restated that. So part of it with that, let's take for agreement, like as an accepted and agreed position, that the briefing and contract said for with that from a subcontracting point of view. So I specifically outlined the example to you.
Sorry, it said what?
If there's external firms that have no work for people, that are referring people onto other organizations and saying, I've got nothing for these guys, at least if I refer 50 or 60 or whatever, like your people to this firm for having some work for the next X amount of months until events pick up or until pubs open and kick up again, or there's more static and construction security, then at least they're still, I suppose, from an original employer point of view, is doing the right thing by the people to say, I've got nothing for you.
Acting was actually doing them a favour?
No. So, and I'm not sure why you're not understanding. I was very, very clear with explaining to you that, and this, I'm saying generically for with this and across for with this project, a firm referring its people across to an entity who is dealing as part with the hotel project.
Just so I understand, because we don't have a whiteboard here, referring from whom to whom?
Okay, I'll say it so that it's clearer. So in other words, let's say company A is providing security to this project, to the hotel quarantine project.
Company A is the party that's contracted.
Company A is that's contracted for that. Mm-hmm. Yep, that's right. Company B, C, and D does static security, pub and club security, and then event security for company C. So they have absolutely no work at all for this workforce. Mm-hmm. If company A was to liaise with the client and was to contract that work out, so B, C, and D would be invoicing this company for the work provided. The employees of B, C, and D were on B, C, and D's payroll system and engaged and employed by those people, then that's contracting. Mm-hmm. If company A speaks with company B, C, and D and says, you have no work for your people due to the changing market, the pandemic, and a range of other things, we have work available for these people. They would need to be engaged by us on our payroll system.
So this is
this is company A saying this to B, C, and D. These people would be signing up letters of offer, engaged with us on our payroll system, going through our training and induction. Then from that point of view, under Section 38, under taxation legislation and the range of others, that's not contracting. And you clarified and accepted, you said, when I mentioned it to you, you said, no, that's right, that's not contracting. However, the view of clients, specific elements of clients across the different states, views that as being differently. because they view that as being indirect contracting. So when I'm saying about understanding the specifics, so we're not heading down the path with this about a company and a company invoicing for services, that's not the path. And that's what I'm saying. I'm not sure why, if you didn't understand what it said.
It's a lot of guards. And I mean, there's a lot of people in many industries who might work for, many companies. So you might have a guard who, works for ASIS and he works for S&P or Certis. He works for Southern Cross Group. He works for Southern Cross Protection. He works for us. And, he does a lot of casual work. Or she, so when it's event season, they just basically, pick the events they want to do or when work's short, it's first in, best dressed. So they own probably half a dozen shirts and they work for half a dozen companies, and whoever employs them on any given
casuals,
them a pay slip. There's no, I don't think there's any question about that sort of model. But I mean, coming back to sort of company A and B and C and D, companies B, C, and D have no work, and look, there's obviously plenty of people out there right now who are looking for work, and so. The person on the contract between the two parties, so company A says to the end client, look, we've got access to companies B, C, and D. Do you want to use them? Now that's subcontracting, right? That's contracting. As distinct from companies B, C, and D saying, look, we've got all these people idle, so why don't company A put them on their books and from there. That's not really any different to the normal situation where you'd have guards working for a bunch of companies. I mean,
and that's the point I'm trying to get you to understand, Daniel, because so in other words, and whether it's because of the combination of security, of business acumen, security experience, and other parts, I know you've understood and accepted that, like at that point, understanding the difference between those. What I'm saying, different stakeholders with regards to the project, like with the project, have different understanding with what you and I have just stepped through and understood that. So that piece now.
What actually happened? Where was the breakdown?
So when you're saying specifically for a breakdown, I'm saying from an educational your point of view. So you're aware of different opportunities for for engagement and resource development during this project. That sort of referral and then signing up with these people is an approach. It's been taken that approach through multiple providers.
Recruitment from who actually paid whom, and I suppose the expression in investigations is follow the money.
Yes,
who that's is right. The guard that's actually standing on a door somewhere? Who's putting the money in his pocket? Which entity is doing that?
The engaging employing entity, which would be company A.
So they have that person's tax file number. They're withholding tax on their behalf. They're issuing a pay slip and depositing directly into their bank account. It's not going via another.
If there's anything different than that occurring, so in other words, if company A hasn't got application forms, signed up application forms, banking details, taxation details, for those files, they're not set up on their system from a payroll point of view and those point of view, then if they haven't got those details, then those organizations would be the organizations that would be contracting and getting organization to contract through. So that is precisely my point. That's correct.
In what sense?
I'm sorry, I don't understand what the question is.
So what I'm saying is, I'm looking at the isolation hotels in particular. So were guards being paid solely by the head contractors, or what were there subcontractors that came up? Because my understanding from everything that was reported is that there were companies who were found to be relying on subcontractors, and on that basis, they were in breach of the head contract. And there are other companies that didn't do that. And I think there's sort of a muddying of the waters between an employee referral scheme versus what's essentially paying another company who then employs the staff. So what actually occurred, which actually happened, and where's the misunderstanding that the client or SLED or the, I forget their names, but the audit organisation didn't pick up on that?
Well, I suppose firstly, I can only comment on the parts that I'm aware of from various discussions with a variety of organisations as well. I'd say across both states, there's probably been a healthy mix of both. I believe that it would be organisations during the projects that would be involved from a contracting your point of view, and there's organisations that would be involved and structured around with a referral your point of view. So I'm sure as part of any follow-up or investigation by any of the regulatory authorities or industry regulators, all that sort of information will come to light, and obviously, especially in Victoria, with the public live streamed inquiry, but there's been a mix with both. And so from industry feedback, definitely a healthy mix with both. So that will all come out in the wash.
Okay. But I mean, you're obviously personally familiar with what happened in New South Wales. And, I mean, obviously, a lot of this has been motivated by, I suppose, probably a fairly sort of acrimonious breakdown there. What would you say went wrong? What do you think you were unfairly treated? Do you think they misunderstood things? Do you think there was a sort of systemic failure there that's been bad for the industry, bad for your company, bad for the end user, or how would you say this went wrong?
Sure. I suppose well articulated to try and bring it back to me and the Southern Cross, your point of view, rather than the general discussions we're having.
An elephant in the room. You've got a chance to state. Well, I'd rather that than security industry rumour mill. I'd rather hear it directly.
Sure. I suppose, a couple of things I'd say. Firstly, from security industry rumour mill, I have no concerns or issues from security industry rumour mill because, honesty and integrity, everything comes out with the wash and validation with that. So from my point of view, I said I have no concern or issue with that whatsoever. In regards to with breakdown for how this has occurred, I'm going to say generically because the same sort of framework, and in New South Wales, there's been that hybrid mix. There has 100% been some organisations involved in contracting, and there's been organisations involved with this referral type system. And sadly, with those, whether it be from a lack of awareness and understanding of the relevant overarching legislation, from that taxation point of view and security legislation point of view, there is very muddied waters in the understanding with that and what it truly means.
Muddied by
you and I had that discussion.
Was the client aware of the sort of referral scheme, or were they unaware of it?
I can say specifically that yes, that in some of the circumstances, the client was involved, was aware of a referral scheme, and client perspective of that referral scheme was that it may have been deemed as indirect contracting, which from you and I both having those discussions and as being people with both over 20 years in the industry, we wouldn't believe that structure would be be deemed as being contracting. You verified that yourself. Right.
But the client felt otherwise?
As I said, I'm only across some elements of communication. And part of it with this, it's a big industry, but it's a small industry. So yeah, there's definitely some mixed messages with those. And that's why as part of any follow-up action that happens in review with this project, that will be a key follow-up part with the findings. But as I said, and although that this was expected, the crux of my part with the article, and I know a lot of your main focal points have been in and around the contracting. Firstly, from this point of view, because whether that be an easy target with our industry, of course it is. That's obviously quite obvious. It's to anybody, anytime with the service delivery, and not just with this project. I mean, it's a key issue for us, and the effective management for how that's actioned nationally. So from that point of view, that's definitely something that until we get the communication message right, till we get the right frameworks, the right balance of enforcement and education, that's something that's going to continue be an issue. But the crux with my article, the crux with my discussions is, sadly, we're falling into the same trap that's always happened. The discussions that we've had with this now, which has been for 55 minutes, 30 minutes of it have been in and around from the contracting point of view. And what happens is, the exact same thing's going to happen. We're going to have the next situation that happens within our industry that we need to face from a security point of view. And I can guarantee you nothing will have changed.
Well, I agree with you there because, one of the things that we've seen over the last few years, any time there's a well-publicised scandal in the industry, the Wilson with the ACCC, SNP by way of ICAC, your number has come up now as well, and on it sort of goes. But as you said, does anything change? There's people like me. I mean, I just sort of sit on the side, sort of shaking my head and looking at all of this and thinking that the more things change, the more they stay the same. So wrapping up, what do you think needs to change in respect to integrity, both at a contract level and also a personal level across the industry? And what are the quick wins that can very rapidly solve some of these problems so that we're not just seeing legitimate providers put at a strong disadvantage because they play by an increasing set of rules and red tape, as opposed to other providers who perhaps have a creative interpretation of it or just flagrantly ignore it?
Sure. A couple of different silos, like with my response to this, and I mean this with the utmost respect. Part of it with this is the fact with the very discussion and the amount of time we spent on this part for with this segment of with contracting and others is that sadly, and being very direct about it, I see that there's a range of people in our industry that regard us, firstly, that either don't want to stand up and say something about it if they're challenging the safe position or the part, or not flying the flag for with the industry.
I think there needs to be. I agree. I mean, I think when this has happened, I, for example, post something on LinkedIn and I see who comments underneath, and it's almost like a sort of chorus of usual suspects. But when I look at the analytics and I say, who's looking at the post, that's always where the real the real story is, because you see a lot of companies who I suspect right now are looking at their feet and staying, very, very quiet. Now, I mean, you haven't. I mean, you've actually put your hand up and you've had this, and look, I'm asking you some pretty hard questions, and I appreciate you're here. So go on.
So part of it, what I was getting to with that is people, and I'm going to say, myself, yourself included, and a range of others, we need to do more about focusing on the surrounding elements with the industry, not just the parts that are current and getting the media response like at the moment. And so these sort of things at the moment, when we have an access for forward-facing communication to the community, to general public, to media, to a range of others, we need to be also working and focusing on things that are for the improvement of the industry. And I can say comfortably, I could probably count on less than my hands, like in my hands and feet, the number of people who I see content up at the moment talking about what we can do for improvements with systems and processes and others. And sadly, what happens is we fall into this trap. We fall into, rather than saying there's some things that we could do better to improve these outcomes, to improve the industry and others, we fall into discussions about like the parts that are the easy target. I mean, in other words, if you look at the comments that the Victorian opposition leader made and saying what was the fall down in Victoria, he said the fall down in Victoria, one of the main parts was using private security firms, which are really fit for purpose for people working in pubs with a lanyard around the neck.
That was nonsense what he said. I don't think it was a radio announcer. I think he referred about blokes wearing lanyards and so forth. But I mean, utterly. He said it. He said it in his 3AW interview. So he specifically said that. So what I'm saying is, like with change, like you're first at the top level, security industry leaders, managers, and others for things as well. We've got to be comfortable having some of these discussions. With some of the things that I put out, do I know that I open myself up for challenging my opinions, for getting in difficult situations? Yeah, 100%. But I would much rather that, even if it means that it comes back on me in some element personally. And that's why I always preface any discussions and others, if it's my own thoughts and opinions, that this is me representing my thoughts and opinions with the industry, is that things need to change. For some reason, I put that article up. The majority of feedback was very, very polarized. One part was elements in the industry saying, you're right, I'm not sure why they're not listening to us, why we're not having these planning sessions and with all these different stakeholders, like I mentioned. The other parts jump in and says, yeah, but we're still in industry having these parts and these issues with contracting. Of course, those things are still there. But if that's where we're focusing all the conversations, we're not going to have any real change with the industry. So the first part from my point of view is that we need to be having some real robust discussions about what we can do for raising our profile as an industry. Because at the moment, the majority of media attention, all we're doing is anybody who's looking at security as an industry now, as a career, if I go and speak at a registered training organization about security and I talk about developing in different areas and social media analytics, behavior profiling, working in the control rooms, for these sort of things as well, they think, I wasn't aware of these sort of parts. Yeah. If the majority of media they're seeing is about this stuff. The talent coming into industry is of the mistaken belief that security is 200 kilo bloke standing outside pubs.
Exactly.
And it's not. There's no question we can do better. But I think the police are even going to have that recruiting challenge as well, because there's a whole generation of young people now that are being brainwashed to believe that cops are thugs. And so that will perhaps even become a self-fulfilling prophecy where, decent, intelligent people might not look to policing as a career the same way they right now don't look to security. And of course, that then means the people who do come in are possibly less than ideal. So there's no question reform has to happen there. But for every 2 steps forward, it seems like we take 4 steps back, because there are companies that are trying to do the right thing. Sometimes there's mistakes of judgment, but there's other companies that demonstrate mistakes of character. who, in my opinion, keep these other organisations down and are sort of lining their pockets at the expense of people who are doing the right thing. So we have this very sort of uneven playing field between companies that play by the rules, and I think there's too many of them, and companies that just sort of avoid that, which puts them at a commercial advantage, at least until such time as they get caught. And by and large, most of the time, they won't. I mean, this thing with the isolation hotel, was probably the first case study I've ever seen where, in real time, there was this constant auditing and vetting that was going to catch these things, as opposed to, every local government contract I've ever seen where, on day zero, they said, do you promise to pay your staff and not use subcontractors and, meet all the criteria, and, the tender ticks all the boxes. So of course they start on day one, and they get away with it for years and years and years and years. Meanwhile, there's other.
So surely you see we're heading to the point where we're saying and I suppose looping back to the part that I said earlier on, we're saying about, so where does it take for us to improve as an industry? Surely you would understand as well, and as being somebody who, on the Select Advisory Council like I was, and with the role your involvement with media, so surely you understand, and with your 20 years over experience in the industry, having that open, collaborative, consultative approach with various stakeholders in any of these projects and with industry in general helps to, firstly, have more alignment and communication. So from an awareness point of view, for feeding of information for those people that are taking the different path, that helps with that. It helps for sharing information and improving our industry from a communication and best practice point of view. It helps ensure consistency across a lot of these projects, like from the training development, like an awareness point of view, so better security outcomes. All those endpoints are you come forward, but none of those things are going to happen unless we have some of these sort of discussions, unless we focus in time on energy, rather than just saying and accepting how things were in the framework and the initial engagement frameworks and other people saying, okay, look, we understand this now and here's a variety of circumstances, but what do we also do to improve with the system?
Yeah,
what do we do to make sure this doesn't happen again?
I don't want to see a situation where, this industry and this nation lurches from failure to failure to failure, trying to figure out what happened rather than preventing it next time. But, there's clearly a lot of work to be done in that area. Final thoughts?
Yeah, final thoughts. I mean, for this, it's been a good, robust discussion. I mean, as I said to you from the start and from with the article, I'm always happy when I put my thoughts out there. You always become an opportunity for having those questions and checked. And I think that the intent for with the article and my intent for with this discussion was exactly the same. It wasn't saying about the fact, hey, here's all the failures that we had. It's what are we doing as an industry? And when I'm saying industry, for with the client holistically, not just the industry itself, the engagers of industry, the potential entrants to industry. What are we doing to improve and evolve for what we're doing so it's not the same thing? Because that same framework of that consultative approach with multiple stakeholders, it's like risk management 101, but for some reason, when it comes to with a lot of the larger scope contracting and others, your primary contracts, we don't take that approach. And it's the same things reflective between large mass gathering like events to these sort of projects for things as well. That's a key part for this. I think that from an industry point of view, we need to do better. We need to be having more robust discussions. We're not going to be heard and be sitting at that table talking from a consultative point of view until we've raised awareness with our capabilities. Part of the reason why it may not have happened, that we weren't as part, when I say we, I'm talking the security industry and representatives in different states. There's some fantastically experienced people, ex-AFP people in the industry and a range of others. Why were we not involved or part of a planning process? Maybe because of the fact that end user clients aren't aware of the capabilities of the people that we have in their industry. I haven't got the confidence in that. So how do we change that? What role do we play as industry leaders and people with tenure, yourself, myself, there's a range of others over 20 years in the industry? What role can we play to help people understand we should be having some discussions with you? There's elements of this project that's on our radar that's not on yours. If we do this together...
That's a very good... That's a very good way to look at it. There's more discussions between end users and stakeholders. Scott Taylor, thank you very much.
Thanks, Daniel.